Okay, good morning. Lesson 69. There's really nothing new in today's lesson, so I'm just going to give you a quick once over what you need to know. Okay, you're going to hear the term decimal fraction over and over and over again. What is a decimal fraction? A decimal fraction is anything over 10, 100, 1,000. For us, that's as far as we would go, but it could be over 1,000,000, a trillion. It doesn't matter. If it's ones and zeros, that's a decimal fraction, okay? So you're going to have to remember what a decimal fraction is. Now, if you are given a fraction, let's say like a quarter, okay? And they ask you what the decimal is for that. If they ask you about a quarter, a half, or 3/4, that's easy. Just think of money. If you have a quarter, what do you have? 25 cents, 25%. If you have a half a dollar, what do you have? 50 cents, 50%. If you have 3/4, with things with the caribous on them, what do you have? 75 cents, so it's 75%. But you also have another option. You could, if you don't know it from your memory, say you had a fifth. Well, if I can get to 100, I can figure out what the decimal is. So how do I get from 5 to 100? Times 20, so it's times 20 on the top, so I go 20 over 100, 20%. Right? Or decimal 2, whatever you prefer, okay? So you can look at a fraction, do it in your head and go, I gotta do times 20, so this is 20, so that's 20%, right? Or you can use your calculator and go 1 divided by 5 equals 0.2, okay? So you have a bunch of options. You might know it. You can get it to a decimal fraction where you can get it to a percent easily by getting it over 100. Or you can use your calculator and go top divided by bottom, okay? If they give you the percent, it's like say they give you 20% and they ask you for the decimal, well, it's decimal 20, and they ask you for a fraction, it's this, right? I would accept 20 over 100, I would accept 2/10, I would accept 1/5, because 20 over 100, if I divide it by 10, right? The trick I always use is if I'm dividing by 10, just take a 0 off of both of them. So you end up with 2 over 10. But what I actually did was go 20 divided by 10 is 2, 100 divided by 10 is 10, and I get 2/10. Now, here I went 2 goes into 10 5 times, so it's 1/5, right? So I divide them both by 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1, 10 divided by 2 is 5. So this is lowest terms. If they asked for it in lowest terms, you'd have to have this. If they ask you for a fraction, it doesn't say lowest terms. So I'd accept 20 over 100, 2 over 10, anything that was equivalent to 1/5, okay? So you're gonna need to know how to do that. I don't think there's anything else that all you need to know is how to convert decimals to fractions, fractions to percents, like moving all the way around in that 3-piece dance we've been looking at, decimals, percents, and fractions, right? So in the first one you have a chart, and they give you a quarter, and they ask you, so the first one is the fraction, then they ask you for the decimal, then they ask you for the percent. So what is a quarter as a decimal? Well, I have some options. I could go 1 divided by 4 on my calculator. I could go, well, I can get from 4 to 100 by 25, so it'd be 25 over 100. But I also know that a quarter is 25 cents. So I know that my decimal is decimal 25. And as a percent, 25%. Easy breezy, right? Okay. The next one, they give you the decimal 3/5. Okay, well that's super easy. It's 35% and 35 over 100, right? Because I have 2 decimal places, 2 numbers after the decimal, which means I have 2 zeros. This 5's in the hundredths column, so it's got to be over hundredths. I tell you both ways because I know it makes sense to people different ways. Okay? So, now, I would take 35 over 100 because it doesn't ask for it in lowest terms, but just for fun, let's put it in lowest terms. So, does 35 go into 100? No. But there must be a number that goes into 35 and 100. As soon as I see 5 and zeros, I think 5. So I'm going to divide them both by 5, and 35 divided by 5 is 7, and 100 divided by 5 is 20. So I would also take 7/20ths. I might even give you a bonus mark for putting it in lowest terms. Okay? I'll do one more of the later ones with you just because it's harder. I'll do the last one. How's that? They give you the decimal 55, 55%. Couldn't be easier. Pretty sure a kid in grade 1 could handle that. And 2 numbers after the decimal, so I know it's over 100 because it's got 2 zeros. It's in the hundredths column, so I'm over the hundredths. How many do I have? 55. Good enough answer, but let's put it in lowest terms just because we can. I see 5's and zeros, so I'm going to divide by 5. So I end up with 11 on top. 11 times 5 is 55. And 5 goes into 120 times. So 11 over 20. Okay? Pause the video. Go do number 1. Fill in that chart. Okay. Now, they give you a mix match, a percent and a fraction, or a decimal and a percent, or a decimal and a fraction. And you have to make them both the same. It says first change them to both decimal fractions with the same denominator, okay? So we're looking for something that we can change them both to, seeing as it's a percent, hopefully it's 100. So let's see. The first one, they give us a half and 47%, okay? Now, if this were a test, it specifically says change the pair to decimal fractions with the same denominators. So that means that we have to get these with the same denominator. However, in my own head, I know a half is 50%. So I could just go like that, right? Because I know that one off the top of my head. But we'll follow the instructions and do like they want us to do. So 47% is 47 out of 100, right? Because a percent is always out of 100. A half, well, how do I get to 100? Times 50. So I end up with 50 over 100 here, 47 over 100 there. That's greater. Okay? Do another one for you. Let's do D. They give us 3/4 and 70%. Okay, so this is 70 over 100. I got to get this to 100. How do I go from 4 to 100? Times 25. 4/4 make $1. 3/4 make 75 cents. So this is 75 out of 100. So 75 is bigger. Now, as soon as I saw this question, I knew this was 75%. I knew this was bigger, but I followed the rules because I'm a good girl. Okay, and let's try the last one. How's that sound? Okay, so 1/10 and 10%. Okay, so this is 10 out of 100 because it's a percent. And then we got to get this to 100. How do we go from 10 to 100? Times 10. So that means this is 10 out of 100. So on both sides, we have 10 out of 100, so they are equal. Okay? Pause the video. Go do number 2. All right, number 3. Change the numbers in each set to decimals. Okay, we're going to decimals. Then least to greatest. So they give us 3/5, 42%, and decimal 7/3. Okay, so decimal 7/3 is fine. 42%, I need to change it to a decimal, right? I can do that easy. It's decimal 42. 3/5 is the problem, but it's not a big problem because I could just use my calculator and go 3 divided by 5 equals, or I could get it over 100 because I know how to get 5 to 100. It's times 20. Which means the 3 times 20 would give me 60. So I'd have 60 over 100, which is decimal 60. Now, something I want to remind you of. When you are ordering decimals from least to greatest or greatest to least, make sure they have the same number of digits, or at least that you look at the first one or two or however many there are. Because somebody could make a mistake and say that decimal 6 is less than decimal 42, right? But this isn't actually decimal 6, it's 6/10, which means it's 60 hundredths. So make sure you compare equal to, like, apples to apples, right? All right, so we have decimal 73, decimal 42, and decimal 6. And we have to go least to greatest. So decimal 42 is the least, decimal 60 is the next least, decimal 73 is the greatest. Okay? So there's that one. I'll do the last one with you too. Okay, 1/4, decimal 0.9. Be very careful with these. And 15%. Okay? So we got to change them all to decimals. So this is easy. This is decimal 1/5 because it's already out of 100. This is already a decimal, so I don't have to do anything. I could use my calculator and say 1 divided by 4 is, or I could change it to something over 100 so I could make a decimal. Or I could just say, I know what 1/4 is. It's decimal 2.5. It's 25 cents. So now we got to put them in order. So we've got decimal 0.9. Remember, this is like 9 pennies. This is like 25 pennies, and this is 15 pennies. Don't be confused when you have this. When the number is right up against the decimal, you need to add a 0. This is 90, not 9. Don't confuse them. That's a trap that lots of kids fall into. Okay, decimal 0.9, 1/5, and 2.5. So this is smallest, 15 is second, 25 is the biggest. Okay, that is a 3, just didn't write well. Okie dokie. Pause the video, go finish that question, down to the last one. Okay, in Rachel's class, decimal 4.5 of the students like pepperoni pizza, 35% like cheese, and 1/5 like vegetarian. What type of pizza do the most students like? So we've got 0.45 is pepperoni, 35% is cheese, and 1/5 is vegetarian, right? We want to find out what's the biggest of these, but we have a fraction, a percent, and a decimal. We can't compare them like that. What do you think would be the easiest? I guess for me, the easiest would be to change them all to decimals, because this would stay at decimal 4.5, this would be decimal 3.5, and I could take my calculator and go 1 divided by 5 and figure it out, or I could get to 100. To get to 100, I times 20, which means there'd be a 20 on the top, 20 over 100, which is decimal 20. So I have 2 decimals, 2 decimals, 2 decimals, so I can compare them all easily. Decimal 20, decimal 35, decimal 45. And the question was, what type of pizza do the most students like? The most students like pepperoni. This would be 45%, this would be 35%, this would be 20, right? That's it, that's all. Easy breezy for today. See you tomorrow.